Cool. So my talk is cheap and easy phishing that actually works. I tried to include French or a French slide for everything I talk about, but I'm going to speak in English. And the idea behind this is that I just finished a red team engagement that included phishing, and I found some very interesting successes. So here's some information about who I am. A bunch of TV, so whatever. Here it is in French. I'm not really going to get into that. I do all kinds of pen testing. Mine is Kubernetes, Google Cloud, and Azure, but I'll do it if you want. So just a brief overview, like what the fuck is phishing? Here's an FBI definition. I tried to find one in French. I didn't have any luck, but how I say it, it's how every 17-year-old gets in your organization. That happened to Uber, at the end of last year. I'll tell you, I'm not a big fan of phishing, because every 17-year-old can do it, but I still think that, one, organizations still need it and want it, and so to know, what arsenals or what works or what doesn't, especially when you get to certain distinctions, which I'll talk about in a second, is important. So here are some possible targets that I've touched or attacked in phishing. Ones that you need to note, right? There's monetary distinctions, and then there's going to be type distinctions. So if we look at the monetary ones, it's going to be organizations that are equal to or less than $10 million in revenue, assets, stuff like that. We're going to look at Fortune 500, 300, and Fortune 10. And then the other type of distinction that's important is, software development, healthcare, financial institutions. And the monetary one is important in what protections they have and what assets they have to protect. And then, the type is, what regulations and what manpower basically, and what their crown jewels are, right? Because ultimately, whether it be phishing and external and internal, the crown jewels are not always getting a DA, not always compromising the cloud, but it's what's important to them. So in this case, I was attacking a Fortune 300. It's a financial institution. They have a very, very mature security posture, $1 trillion in assets.
I got feedback on my watch that people in the back don't hear you very well. Can you speak louder?
I will try.
I know it's still COVID time, but...
Okay, yeah. And they're in greater than 6 countries. So this is a very mature, very large organization, and that comes with its own challenges. And so what I had to do was 6 phishing campaigns, and I'll talk about 3 of them, what worked, what didn't, and some more details into that. So what were the goals? We laid out a few goals with the client, right? It was to harvest username and passwords and 2FA tokens, session cookies, whatever I can to gain access to stuff. It was to collect a list of targets for spear phishing, to follow through with it. And then, the biggest one would be to have the target execute a C2 stager, that gave me some initial access, which then I would leverage to persistence, and then I would stop and tell them, we're persistent on your cloud or your internal, and let's go from there. And then obviously, all of these are to find holes in their email filtering or their external security posture. So just same thing, but in French.
How did you make the translation?
My French tutor and I.
Oh, awesome.
So where do you start with OSINT? And I'm a big OSINT fan, as I put in the first slide. So you need to discover a list of emails, right? This is a red team. I'm going in with just a company name. What can I do with that? Discover a list of third-party services, right? That's stuff that they use that is outside of their control, but I know that they trust or that they trust the name, right? And then the other one comes from experience and time, which is these mainstream applications or third-party services that I see organizations at a similar size use, which comes with experience reading the articles, reading the news, keeping up with the latest and best tech. So what does that actually look like? Phonebook.cz, which is an Intel X IBM company, great. That's a great resource. Infoga, a classic, not so great anymore, but still always worth trying. Rocket Mail, search engine dorking, and then my favorite, data breaches and data leaks. And then, for the third-party services, that's where like search engine dorking, and notice I'm not just saying Google, it's any, Baidu has, dorks, Yandex has dorks, all of these. And what's awesome about that is, in Russia or China, they may not pay attention to the robot.txt. They may, pay attention more to things that normally, Google will not show you. And then the last one, like I said, it comes from experience. So here's like an example list if I was going to target the French government. Normally, you would pick a subdomain, right, because it would be one sect of it, but here's just an example list, that you compile. Here's an example of how you can do it, using Google. Here's just a really, really basic Google dork. Again, like I said, these dorks tend to work across search engines, and I do have a tool that you can find on my GitHub if you want. And so here you can see that in the result, right, we have this .gov.france email. And so this is part of that manual testing or that manual OSINT search that you have to do to compile this list of emails. For third-party services, right, here's an example of another Google dork I would use. Now, I'm not going to say this is definitely used by this county in France. However, this is how you go about it, right? You put the company name, you put minus their top level domains, and you look for the third-party companies that come up. This is especially important, and I'll get to that. So here's the actual list of third-party services that I created for this $1 trillion company. And I always include a source or the tool I used, because in a red team, part of that comes to what could the blue team do better? What can they do to protect themselves? So you always want to include sources for that. So here's a list, and I'll ask, don't have the pressure, but I'll ask, do any of these stick out to any of you as ones that may be useful in a phishing campaign?
Yeah.
Which?
GitHub, Adobe, everyone is using those.
Okay, yeah. So at GitHub, that code stuff, right? Maybe I could send a fake GitHub email. Something like Adobe, right? They do like signatures similar to DocuSign, or who knows what else, right? SurveyMonkey, that's another great one. Those are surveys that you may do for an organization. So basically at this point, I came to this and I said, which of these can I make a free or a cheap account and that I can leverage to compromise this organization or gather information? The idea being, if I create my own subdomain or my own domain, using MailChimp and GoFish, it's going to be filtered. They have $1 trillion, they have a team to protect themselves. So if I can leverage something that they already use, that's already trusted, that's how I can get in. And then here's an example of a mainstream third-party services. So even though it wasn't listed on there, and I know I don't see them here, but I talked to a few guys last time, they worked at Quark Labs. So I went to Slack and I typed in Quark Labs and I determined they use Slack. So that's another indication that maybe if I was going to target them, I can make a fake Slack login page. Some other ones that are really popular: DocuSign, Share Drive, Slack, WebEx, Confluence. These things you see at any really from, I would say, the Fortune 500 up organizations, they all use this. So here's the first campaign, and I'll only go through a few. From this slide on, I have this total at the top, right? This is to track, because like I said, I compromised $1 trillion organization for under $150. That's the point of this. It's cheap and easy. So what did I do? The first one I did was leveraging Evil Engine X, one custom domain. I noticed that they were using Outlook or O365, right, Office 365, based off a DNS record. And then I have a video, but this is a real example email, which it's not very good quality, but I put Russia to make them especially worried if they got that right. And this was a real email that my own O365 account got. I just modified it, to do what I want. So I'll tell you, this demo, not the best, because at this point, the redirect URL wasn't perfect. But here you can see I'm using a free EC2 instance, so that's important because I said I only spent $10 on the custom domain. I did not give money to Amazon at this point. So I'm using a T2 not a micro. For the security group, the firewall, I just have to open up a few ports to use Evil Engine X2. I use the domain Biden'sPresidency.com, and you set up a few DNS records for that. And then I have some noise because I'm just old school. I like to use screen. So now I'm SSH into the EC2. I set up a screen session, attaches a multi-user. I'm going to open Evil Engine X, enable the Outlook or the O365 Fishlet is what it's called, and we'll go from there. So these are the ones built in if you want to dev your own. Also, this developer who made this tool is making his own cert and teaching you how to do it. So I'm going to use the Outlook one. These are examples of lures, which is basically a specific URL that you can hit. And I'll explain in a sec why that's important. So I'm enabling the Outlook fishlet, which uses certbot to create, a legitimate SSL cert for your domain.
I think you need to read aloud because it's probably unreadable in the back.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I list the fishlets. I list the lures, which are URLs that already exist that if you hit will bring you to a login page. I'm going to enable it so that when you do hit these, it does actually work. And the first time you run this, it's going to use certbot, which is by the EFF, the Electronic Freedom Frontier, to create a valid SSL cert for your site. Evil Engine X is a reverse proxy, and you'll see more what that means in a second. Oops, and I just restarted it. Okay, so now I'm going to create a new lure. A lure, again, is a specific URL you give to somebody so that you know that they could hit it. Because if you were just to hit bidenspresidency.com, it would redirect you to YouTube and rickroll you. But if you hit that specific URL, it'll show this reverse proxy. So I set up this redirect URL, which in this demo is to Outlook, and this is actually the problem you'll see on why that doesn't work. But I fixed that afterwards. So here's the exact URL you want to give to a target. So for example, in that fake suspicious login, that's the link I put to say click here. Now you see it says sign into your Microsoft account, and this password has changed, so don't use it. But we can see it's login Microsoft Bidens Presidency, right? And this is the real login. This is not a fake login. This is a reverse proxy to Outlook's real login. And this account is protected by 2FA. So at this point, we already have a username and password, but it's still prompting them for the real 2FA code. And there is a way to code this so that you do capture this. I didn't do that in this demo. Again, this was more of a proof of concept. So you'll see, do you want to stay logged in? The 2FA code, It redirects, which is the problem I found. I fixed it if you guys want that. That took me forever to fix. But so basically what I had to do is I had to hit back and then re-enter the username and password, which didn't happen in the real engagement, but for this demo, it did.
Like in the real engagement, did it redirect?
Yes, I figured out the real URL to redirect to, that it worked properly. Okay, and so now we're logged in to our actual Outlook email for this organization, but everything goes through me. And you can code it so that you capture more than just username, password, or session cookie. And so what's most important about this? I didn't get the 2FA code, right? But I got this session cookie. So what I can do is I can log into any account on O365, replace my cookie values, and now I'm signed in as this target. And so that's the end of that demo. So what happened with that was I sent it to about 1,000 targets. Out of the 1,000 targets, maybe 700 of them were valid emails, right? Because I'm enumerating them blind. And then out of that, I only got 5 hits to the site. None of them ended up logging in. So this was semi-successful because I know that I got through their filtering, but I didn't end up getting control of their Outlook account or their O365 account via that. So let's look at the next spear phishing. At this point now, I spent $60 more on a SurveyMonkey account, which is important to note, and I'll explain that. This was the second campaign. Whoever, you said SurveyMonkey, good job. I thought the same. I sent a remote work employee feedback. So do you want to work remotely? I think all of us do. And I'll tell you, I consider doing a COVID one, but I said that's a low blow. I'm not going to do it. So I sent a fake survey with 5 questions like, could you do your work remote? Are you sure you can do it? And then the last ones were, what is your first and last name, your job title, your email address, and your work phone number? The idea being I'll gather a list of, 1, spear phishing targets, and 2, I can see that my intuition that because I found a survey that this company used in Google, there's, that will still be used and will bypass their email filtering. In this case, again, it was about 1,000 emails I took out of like the 60 or 65,000. Out of those, only like 200 went through, and I got 9 responses, including a vice president, multiple managers, security analysts, all kinds of people. And so at this point, the client said, you proved your point, do not call these people, but that's obviously a path I could have taken. I could have called them at this point and said, hey, you've been selected to work remote. We're gonna send you a device, make sure you log into it, or click this link and go to here, and so this was very successful, very interesting, definitely something I'm gonna use in the future. And again, I spent $60 on this. Here it is in French. So here's an example of a third-party campaign I did, right? In this case, this was a DocuSign document. It was an emergency password change form. I spent another, I want to say $70, right? No, $60 on a DocuSign account. And I'll note why that's important. The number was a VoIP number, and the client agreed that I could answer it and say, okay, sure, we'll call you back, and I can't follow through, but it's a proof of concept. The email here was one that was similar to them, that they would trust, but not them. And then you have a current password and new password, and this would hide it when you posted it. This ended up, again, out of 1,000 emails, again, maybe 200 went through, and only one person responded, and he put in fake information. But what's important to note about this one and the SurveyMonkey one is, if you dish out more money for these accounts, you can embed custom HTML to these surveys or to the emails that invite them. You can allow file uploads, and you can allow all kinds of other stuff. Password protection, so you can say, make sure you put in your corporate password to access this survey, anything like that. So if the budget was higher, there is a lot more you can do with it. So even though, especially in this case, the one person that responded with Joe Mama as their email, right? It's still dangerous to click on these and to interact at all. And what's most interesting about this one is they actually attempted to hack back and email me from a throwaway personal email saying, can I get more information about this password change form? I'm kind of confused, which is obviously certainly against policy and definitely not recommended. Because again, you may think you're outsmarting the hacker, but the odds are, you're going to get screwed. Cool. And so then let's get to the big daddy, the most important one, the hardest one, the C2 execution. So at this point, I've spent another $10 on another custom domain that this connects to. I have another EC2, but free tier, so I have not spent money on that. This is by far the hardest. Again, like I mentioned, you cannot use MailChimp and GoFish at $1 trillion company. That is not going to work. If you register a domain a week before this starts, it's not going to work, right? So that's where something like O365 is great, because they have a free trial. All you have to do is connect a credit card, and you get a free account, which allows custom domains and as many email aliases as you want, and the whole suite of O365. So that's definitely a great way, right? That's a highly recommended one, and that's what I talk about here. That's using what we already have, right? It's leveraging these real built services that are meant to exist in a malicious way, which is the hacker way. And then what's most importantly is I use an AWS S3 bucket, also free, with a 12-hour temporary, XAMZ access key, right? So I knew that this isn't public on the internet, and only those for the 12 hours with this specific, link can actually access this executable, and that way, you could track it, etc. I know it's not, a false positive. And then I use an open source and the latest and greatest, which at the time I read and tested myself, that would bypass, most antiviruses. And in this case, it was the Havoc C2 framework, which was made by a 17-year-old, which is also crazy. I'm not going to recommend using it now. I'm pretty sure it'll be flagged, but at the time it worked. And so that, if you have a Cobalt Strike and you have a dev team, it's great. Otherwise, look at what's open source, look at what's new. And I'll give you a second. Here it is in French. Here's the email I used, right? So I was using Linode. It was a possible bounce box, for the external part of this red team. And so I got a real email from them, and I modified it, to this fake password shield. I'm not going to tell you the exact domain. I still own it. So, but here was the fake email. You've been your company has enrolled you in password protection. Make sure to click this link and download it if it's not attached to the email. And so in this case, I did 2,000 emails, 1,000 of them with attachments, which didn't go through, and 1,000 of them with this AWS email. Out of the AWS link, out of the 1,000, again, about 100. So, again, I'm losing a lot, from this OSINT to create these, to find these emails. But out of the 100, 2 people ended up downloading and executing the C2, giving me them control of their systems. And so here we can see the first 2 are me testing on 2 types of Windows boxes with different antivirus to make sure that it would bypass what I hope it would. And then these 2 are the 2 employees that ended up executing it. So what did I learn? Third-party services are king. Again, if you can leverage something that's legitimate in an unlegitimate way, that's how you're going to be successful. When you get to a point where they have, if hundreds, if not thousands of employees trying to stop you. New domains are going to get flagged. If you're going to do red teams, buy domains today for an engagement in 3 months. The older, the better. Let's see, what else? I can't read that, it's in French. Don't go crazy. Don't try to create custom implants or custom everything every time you have to. Again, unless you have a dev for Cobalt Strike, I wouldn't recommend using it out of the box. But the latest and greatest open source that you do some audit with and double check that it works, there's nothing wrong with that. And then of course, the biggest thing for me personally is logs, because I did not enable AWS CloudTrail. Which ended up, making it a lot harder for the client to determine out of their, 100 or 200 employees that got the C2 stager, which ones executed it, right? So that's important. O365 message trace, that showed me which emails did go through, which ones bounced. And then Apache HTTP logs for Evil Engine X to see, what are the URL or what's the IPs of who accessed it. And if you guys want to share war stories after this, I'm happy to do it. Got plenty more and I want to hear some. So, and so I'll just, I think that's my last slide. So I'll just remind, I spent $140 up to this point and I ended up getting control of, two of this $1 trillion company's assets. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? And John, if there is some questions, can you repeat just for the record?
Sure, if you can translate them if they ask them.
Yeah.
Ask in French. Yeah, ask in French.
You can ask in French.
Or in English.
Or in German.
Please.
I have a question about the mail server that you set up. We didn't get into the details on what was the infrastructure of the sending server and how basically you managed to bypass the spam filtering.
Sure, so I leveraged Office 365. So my infrastructure was Microsoft's. And that's part of what helps you bypass it, right? For the first 2 campaigns, right, I used DocuSign and SurveyMonkey. That comes directly from their infrastructure. And that's the biggest point of my talk is don't set up your own infrastructure because it's not going to work when you get to the point where they have, again, $1 trillion in assets, right? So if it's a $10 million company, if it's a software development company even, I find it's a lot easier to do it yourself. But when it comes to that size, I just leveraged, again, what was there, what was legitimate, and that's how I ended up getting past that.
Didn't you have any issue with the quotas? For example, on Outlook, there are some fixed quotas that you cannot go over.
So I use Office 365, which has a free business trial. And then for each of these campaigns, and I had 2 Office 365 accounts. The second campaign I didn't even talk about in here. It wasn't very successful. But I was easily able to send it to 2,000 per one. And I mean, instantly. Now, given I said a lot of them bounced, but with a business account, which a free trial for 1 month, otherwise it's $6 a month, not a big deal. I didn't hit any of that. SurveyMonkey, yes. And that's why those campaigns were limited to 1,000 at a time, right? And that's because I think at the price point I talked about, you can only get 1,000 responses per month. But if I upgraded to have that custom HTML, the custom email invitation, the file upload, the password protection, then I think it was 10,000 responses a month. So now I could have, expanded the size of that campaign.
Thank you.
I had a question.
Yeah.
When you used SurveyMonkey, you created the account, you generated a special form, and then you sent it to all the email addresses that you got.
Via SurveyMonkey, yes.
Via SurveyMonkey,
Wait.
not through email.
No,
So
SurveyMonkey allows you to send. That's why I had to pay
exactly
the.
Why
Yes,
you
I paid the
managed to
$60.
bypass, and that's how you You don't really care about the domains that you create as long as they close without thinking about if they're going to be flagged or not by the email servers of the company.
Right, because it's going through SurveyMonkey's infrastructure. But the email I used to sign up to SurveyMonkey was, French government finance.com, or .france, right? So that it would look more trustworthy to SurveyMonkey also, right? Because this is a red team. I didn't tell SurveyMonkey I was using them for this. Yeah. And so if they were, hopefully they reported me. And I have stories about that on the other campaigns. But yes, so that's the idea, right? So you sign up with, French government. French is the first name, government is the last name. And now it looks like it's coming from the legitimate organization.
Other question? Yeah.
I had another question about the payload part of the presentation.
The what?
The payload, the C2 part.
Okay.
You said you used AWS S3 signed URL to bypass URL verification. But did you encounter any dynamical analysis where the antivirus would fetch your payload using the signed URL and then analyze the payload?
So nothing automatic. I can tell you I didn't end up getting persistence, which thanks for calling me out. So if I had to guess, what happened was they downloaded it, they executed it, and then either they shut off for the day or something noticed it at the end of the day. So I did acknowledge I have control, but before I could do something to gain persistence, I was out. So most likely, yes, there was something client side that stopped me eventually. Anyone else? Could do it in French.
Cobalt Strike requires a license, right?
What?
Cobalt Strike.
Yes, a very expensive, not worth it license.
I recommend using a Sliver from Bishop.
Silver is also cool. Yeah.
Which is open source and developed by a French guy. And
okay, yeah.
You get everything for free.
Right, and it connects, is that the one that connects to AWS and automatically deploys it when you, or am I thinking of something else?
Same features.
Yeah, that's cool. Like I said, it's just the latest and greatest. At that time, I tested it, it would bypass a lot of antivirus. But 2 weeks later, it won't, So I got lucky on the strike, which is pretty common in this, That's the whole idea, right? You're testing an organization in that moment in time, not, 2 weeks from now.
Other question? Yeah, please.
Yes, I have a question about the execution of the payload.
Okay.
Because you have your file mark of the web, your payload mark because they are downloaded from the web or they are mark. But in your presentation, what is the next step about it?
For what? After they execute it?
For the C2.
So after they execute the C2?
Yes. No, before.
Oh, before?
Because the payload is mark of the web. Microsoft implements this feature, so it's difficult. It's really not possible to execute. So.
Right. So you're saying they should have checked if it was a signed, valid executable, right? Yes. That's. I can't tell you. I don't work for this company. I could tell you that there is some hole there.
Not really. Not executable, but
the URL itself?
No, the mark.
So when you download a file, there's an alternate data stream on Windows which says this file comes from the internet. When the user clicks on it, it says this file comes from the internet. Are you sure you want to execute?
Okay, yeah.
So bypass for this, or is it just users clicking on yes?
So I found some indication that they were using S3 buckets. And that they had files in S3 buckets, so I just named an S3 bucket similar to that. So no, I don't have a bypass for that. But like I said, I did test it. Actually, I tested it on Windows XP, Windows 10, and Windows Server to make sure that it would bypass, a few antivirus I put on there, even if it was downloaded from the internet. But like I said, the client was very worried about this and said, "How did you do that?" And I'm like, I don't know. That's up to you. I don't know why you weren't flagged about this, to be honest. You should have been. And like I said, signing, checking for a signature of the executable would have, stopped this, in its tracks, but it didn't. So it's an important lesson. That's why I'm talking about it, You'll be surprised. When a company's that big.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.